Things are coming apart. Our world is at war. In Europe, we have Ukraine. In the Middle East, things seem to be getting worse. I've written here Israel and Palestine, but it seems to be things are growing. In West Africa, we have Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, where thousands of humans across this year have been taking one another's lives. Many more are being displaced. Closer to home, feelings run high. There aren't enough houses, it seems, for those resident in Ireland, never mind those seeking refuge here. Rents rise. Food and utility bills increase. Some people are struggling across a number of jobs to make ends meet. And we live in volatile times. This year, or maybe early next year, in Ireland, in the UK and the USA, there will be elections. And there will be lots of talk. There always is with elections. But opponents will very likely engage in a war of words. They will draw sharp lines, entrenched views, in an increasingly polarised world, with very little common ground in the middle. And that might matter much to many people, because so many people have lost trust in those who actually lead and govern. They might actually be suspicious of those in power, those in the media, those behind big tech. Is the world working for all of us or only for a few? Things seem to be falling apart, and it's not just the news, is it? It's up close and personal in our own lives too. Where is it that you can think of at the moment that things just seem to be getting away on you? At work, at home, maybe in your health, physically, mentally, or spiritually. In your relationships, there's somewhere with someone things aren't right. Or coming apart. Now, I've painted one direction, haven't I? Everything's coming apart. Obviously, we live in a world that's more complex. There are things coming together in our lives too, but it feels like this sometimes, doesn't it? Let's be honest. And with this unravelling, we live in a world of fear. Like, we like to tone it down a bit and we call it anxiety. But it seems to be everywhere around us. But anxiety belongs to the fear family of feelings. The world continues to change in a way beyond our control, and it does feel scary, to be honest, at times. But we've come so far as a culture, haven't we? We live in a digital and technological world. We might like to sometimes look down on those cultures who are closer to nature, who are more traditional or tribal, who live in this world of fear. And yet, when you think about it, for the far that we've come, it feels very similar. Andrew Reid says this. He says, just as the gods of the ancient world pose threats, so do ours. Deep underneath our search for meaning is a fear that if you don't get things right, we won't find our proper place in life. We won't be fulfilled. We won't succeed. We're trying to work out what the so-called gods, or better, idols, want, and to placate them. You know, we very likely don't have a shrine in the corner at home. That's not our idol. But in this part of the world, we might serve success, or status, or family even, putting things that can be good things in God's place. As we make our way in a world where things seem to be coming apart, have you ever noticed that we can't seem to help trying to bring things together? There's something in us that wants to hold things together. We long for something different. I wonder where you think that feeling comes from, that desire comes from. Are we made for something more? For many people in the past and currently actually around the world, Christianity is the centered story that holds things together. And yet we as a nation have been increasingly coming away from that story, or that sense of God making, holding things together in the world. Even if some or many might find religion in its familiar place, its regular times and seasons, its rites of passage, an important part of culture still in Ireland, I think, to be sure about that. It is possible still to have this loose notion of God. God's detached, God's distant from my everyday life. In 2014, a little while ago now, 10 years ago, Tom Inglis, who's a sociologist, interviewed 100 people in Ireland about where they find meaning in life. And he made this bold claim afterwards. He said, religion is not in the hearts, the minds, or on the lips of the Irish people. When it comes to everyday life, people weren't looking to God. That view of life without God that he unearthed in interviewing people is what we might sometimes call the secular story. That idea that we don't need God, or there is no God, we just get on. Speaking about this, Pete Linus and Joe Frost in their book Being Human say this. The premise of the secular story is that we do not need God to survive or thrive. There is no big story in which we all find our sense of significance. Now, what English found back in 2014, I'm no sociologist, okay? But my sense of it is that even then, that was overstated. That there were people in Ireland then, more than 1 in 100, who had a bit of a God story. If that was then, now I would definitely say that there are people who have found the secular story shallow. People who are looking for something more spiritually. Now that's not to say it's Christian necessarily, but people are spiritually searching. Interestingly, in 2021, English himself said this: I am continuously searching for a God I'm not sure exists. He himself is looking for a God story. One consequence that arises from this coming apart from the God story is that we've lost confidence not only in who God is, but in who we are. We have so many contested and confusing questions these days about what it means to be human. It seems to be everywhere we look. Around masculinity and femininity, what does it mean to be a man and a woman? Around gender or transgender or different expressions of sexuality. Around marriage and family. You might be taking a breath in. Yes, we're going to go there. And we're going to go there over the next few months because we need to, because these questions are realities in our lives. We do not fear some of these tricky and challenging questions. It may be true today that some of us are deeply uncomfortable with what's presented to our children as normal in their schooling. We may feel at a loss to know how to express a nuanced position of difference when it comes to Pride Month being celebrated in our workplace. We may struggle to know where to start to engage with our friends or family who are lesbian or gay when it comes to Christian faith. How do we go there with them without being judgmental? How can we be true to what we believe, or better, who we believe in, and care for others? In such a contested and confused world, with so many different stories that people try to make sense of things with, we as Christians can take confidence today in the God story. He has graciously given us his story in the Bible. He has given us words. He has shown himself to us. When things are coming apart, here is the coherent story on which we can stand. So, we're setting off on a hike together. Well, maybe not hike. More of a forest walk I have in mind. But we're going to walk through the first 3 chapters of the Bible over the next 3 months. So I've been thinking of them a bit like a forest. You know when you go for a walk and you look at the map and there's different trails marked, different colours. It's kind of what we're going to do here. Some of those trails will cover the same ground twice, but we're going to look at different topics. So I've had a walk around this forest already. I've kind of gone ahead. I'm going to be the guide who's going to maybe help us explore it together. So we're going to look at our worth next week, then our weakness, then our world, our families, gender and sexuality, our bodies, our work, our rest, and our words. So that's kind of some of the topics we hope to cover And as we do this, my hope and prayer for us is that we will have confidence in the God story as we find it in Genesis. That we get the feeling and the texture of the Genesis story, but also that we go to Jesus, because the scriptures are about him. And through Jesus we come to here, to 2024 here in Ferrybank, in today's Ireland, in our church family, in your life, in my life. I think that God has something fresh that he wants to say to us. We want to be particular and specific. But as we come to his word today, it shouldn't surprise us that he connects with our culture, and yet he challenges it. He seeks to transform it. To a world that seems to be coming apart, beyond our knowing and our control, where we may feel afraid, we come to a good place. Andrew Reid, the Bible scholar, says this. He says, "It was for a world of fear that the book of Genesis was written so long ago. And it's to such a world that it comes today." As we see here from the opening chapter of Genesis, God addresses these very issues. But before we go there, I want to leave aside an assumption. It's an assumption that people who join us here in church on Sunday, that you, as you join us, that people who maybe listen in on YouTube are committed to this way of thinking. You might, if you're honest, find that the Bible's not the first place you go to for answers in life. Let me say, if that's you, thanks for firstly investing your time and listening. And secondly, let me encourage you to keep an open mind. To listen to the God story in the Bible and to consider, how plausible does this sound? How does it compare to the other stories that are on offer out there? And could it be, as C.S. Lewis once said, that you come to believe in Christianity not as you believe the sun is risen, but not only because you see it, but by it you see everything else? In his light, we see light. So, let's come to Genesis 1 and go for a walk around together. And we're going to be countercultural from the very start. The series is about being human, and yet we're going to start by looking to God. It would be so easy to come to this chapter even and to start with, what does it say about our humanity in his image? And yet, I'm going to resist that, because so often we come to look for meaning within ourselves. We come apart from God and from others. We have a story today that is about expressive individualism. We're not going to do that today. We're going to begin with God. We're going to choose to listen to his story to us, rather than trying to work our way up to him. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. First and foremost, front and centre, God fills the stage in Genesis 1. He is named Elohim in the Hebrew, which is actually a plural word. Normally translated God in your Bible, but there's a few places, like over in the Psalms, where it's translated rulers or angels, like spiritual beings, because it's plural. So why is it plural? Well, you look at this chapter and God's not plural, there's one God. It's plural in the language to almost put an exclamation mark, to show how great he is. Because this God is a standalone God. He is before the beginning and before time itself. This God is eternal. He is unrivaled and unequaled. There are no others with whom he is warring here. He is separate from his creation and outside of it. And he creates heavens and earth, all that there is. The prime mover and main actor. In verse 2 there you'll see he is like a mother bird over her chicks. His breath, or his wind or spirit, all the same word, is over the waters, hovering over them, and he speaks to create, we read in this chapter, and to separate, to produce and to fill with life, to bless, and each day to name goodness. God is the architect, the builder, and the surveyor. The one and only creator. When it comes to viewing the world, we tend to be very materialistic. We tend to see it in terms of stuff and things. And so what we might notice here about God is that God creates something, in fact everything, out of nothing. Something only He can do, and whilst that's true, we might miss something else. When God creates the heavens in verse 1, it's more than sky. He gets to the sky a little later, doesn't he? Heavens are the spiritual realms and realities beyond this earth, all created by Him. And in verse 2, we read that in the beginning the world was formless and empty, or waste and void. The Hebrew for this is tohu and bohu. The words sound alike, don't they? They almost sound like swirly, don't they? Tohu and bohu. But you picture that idea of chaotic. This isn't a blank page God is creating from in this story, but a threatening and chaotic environment, and it's important we grasp that. Darkness is over the surface of the deep. And in verses 2 and 3 we see God speaking light. And although darkness and light here mean just what they say, we know that they're developed across the Bible, aren't they? So that darkness is associated with sin and evil and death, and light is associated with goodness and righteousness and truth. Here is a God who is over darkness and light. A God who is sovereign over all. How come we've got this far and we haven't mentioned creation and evolution, or science and faith, and started a debate? Well, go for it now. No, I'm not.
Okay.
We're actually not going to go there, and it's not just because I'm chickening out this morning in some way. It's actually because I think the main thrust of this chapter is not about this. It's not about the questions that we have today about how this world specifically came about, or about how old it is. I was going to say I'm happy to talk about it afterwards. I'll talk about that afterwards. No, I am happy to talk about it. These things are important, but they're not our focus today. Because what I think that this focus in Genesis 1 is about who made the world. Not necessarily how long it took, or how the process developed. Because I do want you to see something here. I'm going to ask you to come with me and see that I don't think this is a science textbook we're reading. And it's not just because I love poetry that I'm going to suggest it's a little more poetic than that. Maybe you heard it in the reading this morning as Gary and Adam read. At the end of each day there was a phrase, wasn't there, that's repeated. There was evening and there was morning, the first day, the second day. God saw that it was good, repeated throughout. There's marks here of some poetic elements. There's a shape and a rhythm where creation is described over the course of a week. But did you notice that the plants appear in day 3 before the sun appears in day 4? Or that day and night are divided up on day 1 before the sun and moon exist. A few scientists out there are a little uncomfortable. It's not a scientific text. But again, happy to talk about this one afterwards. I think the God we see here and how He creates gives us the very grounds of a predictable world in which science can actually happen. What we have here is rather, stick with me on this, it's a form of Near Eastern ancient cosmology. What? It's a story that's old, and it's a story about creation. The story that would have been told, stories that circulated at the time of Genesis writing. And this story is the God story. It's a rival story and a better story. Here's why. The ancient stories spoke of the disordered chaos being brought into order by all these gods who fought with each other. And some of them emerged out of the middle of the water. These gods emerged. How is this God different? He doesn't have the war to get things done. So powerful is He. He speaks and things are ordered. He doesn't emerge out of the waters that are chaotic and turbulent and to the Hebrew mind are threatening. He orders them. And in chapter 2, actually, as we jump ahead a little, the waters become blessing, not chaos. So he doesn't emerge from the waters like Atum or Enki did, ancient stories, or Marduk is the Babylonian god who breaks the head of the sea monster and crushes Leviathan to show how powerful he is. And yet in verse 21 here, we read that God just made these creatures. Or in Psalm 104, if you like to go there later, that creation account, this great monster, sea monster, is described as God's pet or plaything. This is how powerful he is. He brings order into a disordered world. He is unrivaled and unequaled. He creates peace. Let me show you the form of this poetic story. On day 1, God creates day and night. He separates, he orders. And then on day 4, he puts the sun in the day and the moon in the night. He fills them. Day 2, he separates waters and sky. And then over in day 5, he fills them. He fills the waters with fish. He fills the sky with birds. On day 3, he creates land and seas. And day 6, he creates creatures. And last of all, humans to rule and care for the world he has made. Here's a God who sets boundaries, who draws lines that divide, who shapes and orders this world from chaos. And Genesis here is actually the first of the opening 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, or the books of the law. And what I think we have here is more than a hint that God is the one who distinguishes between light and dark, between good and evil. Yes, he marks out the physical world, but also the moral world. He is not just a creator, but he is a good lawgiver. He is the one we are answerable to. And he's a God of peace. Another little repeated phrase you might have picked up is each after its kind. Showing us that there are kinds. There's category and there's order in the world. But it also speaks of variety and breadth. There's so many different kinds. God is the one who creates order and the one who blesses, who fills with life, who calls forth fruitfulness and who is good. His goodness is seen in creation. We hear that echo, don't we, down through the chapter. It was good, until verse 31. It was very good when he looks at the whole. But this is not only the vision of the beginning of Genesis, but this is what you see when you look out. Some of what we see in the world today. God has left his fingerprints on our world. Such a creation that is beautiful and causes us to wonder, draws us out to who he is. A world that continues to renew itself season after season as we're in the freshness of spring. After many long years, it speaks of an established order in the world, which comes from God's established throne, the Creator God who rules everything. That's not all we see in the world though, is it? We've been praying into some of the troubles and hardship and difficulty this morning. We'll have to wait until Genesis 3 to get the story of why this world is broken and suffering, why we have sorrow. And yet, what we have here is God's beauty around us in the world. And yet he has revealed it not just there, but in his own Son, Jesus. We can't find his name in here. It's too early in the story, isn't it? It takes us longer to get there. But John named him, didn't he? John intentionally described Jesus coming as a new creation. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. That life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness has not overcome it. He puts Jesus not only at the start of creation, but he describes Jesus coming into his world as a new creation. as a light in the darkness. So let me suggest a moment ago, if this is who God is in Genesis 1, a God who orders the chaos and brings peace, a God who blesses and fills and brings grace, pause for a second with me and consider who Jesus is in the Gospels. Who do we discover him to be as we travel through Mark's Gospel in Lent? As he stilled the storm and put the waters into place. As in the next chapter, he brought a man's life who was overcome by demons into such calm that it scared people around. He brought peace. He restored people. He healed them. And he brought grace to people. And this is what it is to live in his kingdom, to be part of his people here on earth. As the Church of Jesus, we enjoy and experience the peace and grace of God in our lives. We choose to live under his loving lordship, which means that we choose to live under his words. We trust that what he has marked out as good and evil is right and true, and we go his way with it. And when we do that, we know peace in our lives. Why don't I feel that today though? Well, because that peace is more than just an inner feeling, but it's an ordered reality in our own lives and the lives of our church family, and may even be in the communities in which we are part. As his kingdom comes, as he reorders and restores us. Let me ask you this today. In the mess and chaos of our own lives, what might God want you to know this morning? We might come from different places on this. In the mess of work or family life, or even finding your own personal rhythms of time to pray and hear from God in his word, does God want you to know this? Does he want you to have confidence to step out and to serve him in a world even beyond your control, knowing that he brings peace? You don't need everything to be perfect. You don't need to be scared. You can step out with him. Or, this one's maybe seems a little bit less glamorous, but it's probably what I need to hear more. Might God be saying we need to get our lives in order? We need to be organised. We need to establish structure in the midst of the mess of our lives, because if we're so messy and so chaotic, we're not knowing or showing the peace of the Lord, and that impacts the lives of those around us. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. Words of Frederick Buechner, which he draws, I think, from Jesus' words. When the God of Genesis 1 and the Word made flesh, as John 1, is the one we trust and worship, we do not need to be afraid. He is bringing things together, even as they seem to be falling apart. The last couple of weeks, there were just some words in my head that I've been paying attention to and drawing confidence from, and they just say this: to be a Christian is to be reordered to the reality that no matter how things unfold, in the end, all will be well. In the end, all will be well, because Jesus brings things together in the end. But also, as we face questions in life and enter conversation with people with a very different idea of God or no sense of God at all, we do not need to be afraid. As our culture moves away from a Christian story, which holds things together, when the word transition, even just that word, maybe means something different now, it used to mean. Yeah. It means something specifically that talks about people redefining themselves or their gender or their identity. Let me use it in a broader way today to suggest that our whole culture is transitioning. Maybe to a secular current. Could it even be to a spiritual future? Those things aren't so neat. But let me just say that here in Ireland things are changing. And in the confusion and the contested truth of what it means to be human, we do not need to be afraid. If you're reconsidering today what you've held on to or believed as you come to the God story, not as a Christian, but as you come and look at Jesus. I know it might seem scary, but let me say, if this is true, if he is true, you don't need to be afraid. For me, I take hope in a world of fear because of this. The Jesus I see in the Bible is not only preferable to the other stories that we have around, he's more plausible. He reigns true because he is true. If the Prince of Peace is with us, we do not need to be afraid as humans.